Hello and welcome to Fight News Now Extra. My name is John Pollock. Lots of big news to address today, and we will do so with John Ramdeen. Ahead on the show, we'll discuss the UFC's press conference regarding their plans to combat performance-enhancing drugs in the sport, another failed test for Anderson Silva, and more. On Wednesday, the UFC held a big press conference in Las Vegas, Nevada to address all of the performance-enhancing drug issues going on in the sport, and also announced at this press conference by UFC President Dana White is the next welterweight championship bout, which will be coming up at UFC 189.
And now Rory MacDonald will fight Robbie Lawler for the UFC welterweight championship on July 11th at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas.
They outlined a plan to increase drug testing to every fighter on each and every fight card, out-of-competition testing for all main event and championship title fight competitors effective July the 1st, as well as an out-of-competition drug testing plan to execute on random fighters year-round, also effective July 1st. Fertitta noted that the UFC would also be supporting a 4-year ban for a fighter testing positive on their first offense. It was announced on Tuesday that former middleweight champion Anderson Silva also failed his fight night drug test from January 31st at UFC 183 when he fought Nick Diaz. Silva tested positive for drostanolone, which is the same anabolic steroid he tested positive for during his out-of-competition test, which was administered on January the 9th. Silva's fight night tests also revealed other banned substances by the Nevada Athletic Commission when taken in competition. Anderson Silva, Nick Diaz, and Hector Lombard were all issued temporary suspensions by the Nevada Athletic Commission at Tuesday's commission hearing for their recent failed drug tests. All three will face punishment at a future hearing where all three will have an opportunity to plead their cases in front of the commission. And I'm here with John Ramdeen coming out of today's press conference with the UFC. Dana White, Lorenzo Fertitta, and Lawrence Epstein outlining their plans to combat performance-enhancing drug use in the sport. A lot of ideas presented, a lot of different elements that they're going to attempt to implement. What did you really take away from this press conference, John, and what their plan is?
Well, I mean, you look at the fact that the UFC is serious about cleaning up PEDs in mixed martial arts, because quite frankly, if you look at MMA, from a casual fan standpoint, it's not MMA, it's the UFC. So
right.
All the scrutiny comes down on the world's biggest mixed martial arts promotion, and they have to do whatever they can to change the perspective, because right now a lot of people believe, number one, it's a vicious sport, and number two, everybody competing in the UFC is taking some performance-enhancing drugs. So the UFC it's a good starting off point, a good jumping off point for them to say, okay, come July, everybody is going to be tested. The onus is on us. We have to spend X amount of dollars. It just comes down to how it's actually going to transpire, because they have to communicate with a whole bunch of different commissions. We heard some 45 plus countries where fighters are housed. So it's going to be a difficult thing, but you have to respect the UFC for taking this step and trying to clean up the sport.
Yeah, it's going to be a gigantic financial commitment for the UFC, and it goes beyond just the dollars and cents on paper. I mean, we go back, had that Anderson Silva test come back a few days prior, you have all of those Brazilians that had traveled up for that show. You take Anderson Silva off that card, you probably have to cancel that pay-per-view, and that is a massive loss on top of what they are investing at this point. But starting July 1st, all main eventers, all fighters in championship bouts are going to be subjected to out-of-competition testing, as well as year-round random testing for fighters on the roster. So you won't know whether you're in camp or out of camp. You could get a knock on your door. You're never going to eliminate this. We've talked about this so often, but do you think that this is a solid step forward in terms of a fighter at least second guessing now that if I am going to do this, there's more of an assumed risk today than there was prior?
Well, I like the one point that Dana White made, because he said, quite frankly, if you're caught for this stuff, there could be as much as a 4-year ban from the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And if you are 28 or 29 or you're in your 30s, 4 years can be detrimental to your money-making years. So I think something like that, the fighters will definitely take notice. And the time, you mentioned July, we both talked about this happening in July. So all of these fighters have the next number of months, if they are taking stuff, to get themselves off of it.
It all sounds great on paper, but a big step that they still have to take is getting all of these commissions on board. It's great to say first-time offender, you're going to be suspended for 4 years. But if the commissions are not going to back you up and enforce this, I think a fighter has a real case to argue against the UFC and state, hey, if the commission's only willing to suspend me for 9 months, you're telling me 4 years I can't make a living? I don't think that is going to hold up. So that's going to be tough to get all these commissions on board, all these countries that are going to have to work with the UFC for out-of-competition testing. They're mentioning a third party. It just sounds like there are a ton of logistics, John, that you are going to have to make sense out of.
And Lorenzo Fertitta mentioned that. He said, there's a lot of communication that has to happen. And of course, it comes down to damage control and trying to deal with all the issues that they have to deal with when, trying to focus on something of this magnitude. So it's not something, okay, we have a strict plan over the next 2 years. This is the way things are going to happen. I think it's going to be like a day-to-day, case-by-case scenario, especially when you're dealing with so many different countries.
Do you think Bellator, is there more of a light on them at this point in time? They get a real pass when it comes to this. There's a lot of organizations out there that you can talk about their financial limitations, that the UFC certainly has much more in their pockets to deal with a problem like this. Bellator, though, I feel they do deserve some scrutiny here in terms of they need to update their drug testing procedures with their different commissions as well, because Bellator certainly doesn't get a lot of flack for drug testing.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, Scott Coker has mentioned that as well. He said, there seems to be an issue in mixed martial arts, and we're going to do whatever we can to try to eradicate that problem, but they're clearly not going to dedicate millions and millions of dollars to make sure all of their fighters on their roster are tested year-round. I think because the UFC is kind of the face of mixed martial arts, the onus is on them, and organizations like Bellator and RFA and different promotions around North America, they'll benefit from this in the long run.
Ever the promotion, they also did sneak in the fact that Rory MacDonald will be fighting Robbie Lawler on July the 11th, part of International Fight Week. That joins the Jose Aldo-Conor McGregor fight. I think very strategic that they put that one in there somewhat to divert the focus, that it was pretty much a kind of doom and gloom presence, and we're at least throwing in a title announcement.
Yeah, because if you go on a lot of MMA news outlets right now, they're not talking about what's happening with these PEDs and the UFC implementing the drug testing on July 1st. The shiny little thing dangled in front of everybody's face. They're talking about Rory MacDonald and Robbie Lawler, the rematch, and it's a great fight no matter how you look at it.
All right, well, that's our thoughts on the big press conference that the UFC held. We have more Fight News Now Extra, and we'll be chatting more about this later in the week.